I will never, ever watch MSNBC again. Folks, this is profoundly, gut-wrenchingly depressing. This whole situation over at MSNBC, firing Martin Bashir. I'll tell you, folks, in a just world, Martin Bashir would be given a raise, a promotion, and a time slot in prime time. But this is not a just world. Now, you may have heard erroneously that Martin Bashir is telling people they should go around and shit in Sarah Palin's mouth. That's not what he said. Let me walk you through precisely what it said, because you're not going to really see this on any news reports, because it doesn't fit the narrative that conservatives are trying to establish. Now, he had a segment a few weeks ago. He introduced it by first referring to Palin as America's, quote, resident dunce. Now, I happen to think that's a 100% truthful comment. There's commentary to it, there's no doubt. But given Palin's past, that's actually a sentiment that the vast majority of Americans agree with. And he characterized some of her recent remarks as, quote, scraping the barrel of her long-deceased mind and using her all-time favorite analogy, talking about slavery, in an attempt to sound intelligent about the national debt. Again, everything he said is completely true, fact-based in my view, but arguably, sure, there's analysis there and there's perspective. Not everyone will agree with it, but I can't imagine a single moderate, liberal, progressive, Democrat, or non-aligned voter not agreeing with everything he's said thus far. He then played a clip of Sarah Palin speaking at a crowd. Here's what she said. Our free stuff today is being paid for by taking money from our children and borrowing from China. When the note comes due, and this isn't racist, so try it anyway. This isn't racist, but it's going to be like slavery when the note is due. Bashir then says, it will be like slavery? He's somewhat incredulous at this point. He then says, quote, given her well-established reputation as a world-class idiot, again, completely true to anyone who isn't a right-wing extremist, it's hardly surprising that she should choose to mention slavery in a way that is abominable to anyone who knows anything about its barbarous history. Now, Martin Bashir is making a point that all liberals believe, all progressives, all moderates, anyone who isn't a Sean Hannity clone, actually believes this idea that conservatives are too promiscuous in their use of saying anything they don't like is worse than slavery. Well, no, everything is not like slavery. Martin Bashir is pointing out something that is abundantly obvious to anyone who isn't a card-carrying conservative. So here's how he threads the needle in a way I thought was incredibly rational, fair, factual, clever, and rhetorically interesting. He says, so here's an example. One of the most comprehensive first-person accounts of slavery comes from the personal diary of a man called Thomas Thistlewood, who keeps copious notes for 39 years. Thistlewood was the son of a tenant farmer who arrived on the island of Jamaica in April 1750 and assumed the position of overseer at a major plantation. Well, there's obviously one of Martin Bashir's problems. He's actually using facts. He's actually putting in an interesting, honest account of history, and goodness knows you're not allowed to do that on cable TV. He continues, quote, what is most shocking about Thistlewood's diary is not simply the fact that he assumes the right to own and possess other human beings, but it's the sheer cruelty and brutality of his regime. In 1776, he records that a slave named Darby, quote, subquote now, catched eating canes, had him well flogged and pickled, then made Hector, another slave, shit in his mouth. This became known as Darby's dose, punishment invented by Thistlewood that spoke only of inhumanity. And he mentions a similar incident in 1756, his time in relation to a man he refers to as Punch, quote, flogged Punch well and then washed and rubbed salt, pickle, lime juice, and bird pepper, making Negro Joe piss on his eyes and mouth. End quote from Martin Bashir. He then goes on. I could go on, but you get the point. When Mrs. Palin invokes slavery, she doesn't just prove her rank ignorance. Again, completely honest, completely factual, not something anybody other than a Rush Limbaugh ditto head would disagree with. When Mrs. Palin invokes slavery, she just doesn't prove her rank ignorance. She confirms if anybody truly qualified for a dose of discipline from Thomas Thistlewood, she would be the outstanding candidate. Which I think is incredibly funny, clever, interesting, historical, and factual. He wasn't telling people in 2013 in the United States of America to go capture, kidnap Sarah Palin and shit in her mouth. He is simply pointing out that if someone is constantly complaining about how awful something is, how it's just like slavery, they should perhaps be educated and experience what it's like to experience slavery as it was actually conditioned. Let me put this forth to you. If I or some other liberal said every single time a conservative did something we didn't like, let's say a conservative says, okay, let's have a crèche, a manger scene on City Hall. And I said, that's the worst thing. That is worse than anything that ever happened in Nazi Germany. These right-wing extremists, they're worse than Hitler. If I said that, I think a lot of conservative commentators would rightfully say, then I'm ignorant, that I'm a dunce, that I don't really know the history of what went on in Nazi Germany, and that if someone wanted to educate me, they would perhaps walk me through a prison camp in Auschwitz, show me where people were gassed, where they were incinerated, show me bodies. They wanted to educate me further, perhaps put me in a shower situation where gases are non-lethal, but gas is coming out. That would perhaps educate me on how ridiculous and absurd I am. And I dare say any conservative who would make these completely fair points wouldn't receive a word of criticism from the media establishment or the conservative media. In fact, the whole idea of putting me, T.J. Walker, or some liberal commentator in a gas chamber for a moment to see what it was like and to see what it looked like would either not even get mentioned, or if it did get mentioned, it would get mentioned in the context of giving that conservative talk show host a raise and a promotion. And yet we live in an environment where anytime a liberal says something that's honest, fair, has an element of humor to it, and is hard-hitting, that's considered over the top. Now, I've seen this many times. It reminds me of the time Andrew Cuomo was running for governor a decade or so ago, and he made the completely accurate, fair point that during 9/11, Pataki was relegated to holding the coat of Mayor Giuliani. A fair point, an accurate point. Pataki did not distinguish himself. He did not step up. He didn't show any leadership during 9/11. Cuomo's point was completely fair, accurate, hard-hitting, and I thought funny. How was he rewarded? Not by conservatives, but by mainstream media, by liberal media. Oh my gosh, that's over the top. He was hounded out of the race. And that's one reason why we frankly never see Andrew Cuomo in the media. I think he's been so scarred by that experience. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm disgusted. And I'm not going to watch MSNBC anymore. Because it's one thing if Fox censors an intelligent liberal. If they have some liberal guest on and he really sticks it to conservatives and they ban him, I don't like that, but I get it. I understand it. But when MSNBC, which is ostensibly a liberal network, a progressive network, a network that doesn't shamelessly demagogue Obamacare every day, when they hang out a host to dry, destroy his career for doing what all of their hosts should be doing, it's an absolute obscenity. So MSNBC, you are dead in my eyes.